Here we are. It's class number 10 today. Class 10 is going to be about fine tuning today, researching and refining our work. But before we go into that, class 9 was about your voice. It was a continuation from class 8, where we were connecting deeper with who we are as writers and the way we want to write, the style and tone of our work. And last time we did a little meditation and we connected with works that we love, whether that's literary, film, or paintings or anything else. And it was amazing to listen to what you've come up with in such a short time space, in just 10, 15 minutes. And I've asked you to continue this in your free time. And part of the homework was to watch or read again one of your favorite pieces of work, but this time read it with the eyes of a writer, with the craft in mind, and having that perspective of how did they do that? Why did I love that so much? What did they use there? Why do I still remember that scene? Or why do I still remember that dialogue? Or why do I still remember the book? How did they do it? And the reason I was asking you to do that is because if you spot it outside of you, you have it inside of you. So that's something that you have as a skill, something that you have as a style, as an author. And just becoming aware of it is the first step in starting to use that tool. So I'm curious to see if anyone had the chance to consider that in any shape or form before we continue with the usual.
So I pulled out my book, Olive's Ocean. Something got the cover.
I saw the cover. I googled it last time while you were showing, and it's really cool. It's a really cool book.
Yeah. So when I didn't read it, cover to cover, but I thumbed through it and stopped and read different places and stuff. And I mean, it's like really rich with a lot of dialogue. And so you get to know the characters and all through the dialogue. And for me, it wasn't so much the writing style that drew me in. It was the message of the writing and the theme. And but I think that it's good. I think it's good. And it's inspired me to want to find other books with dialogue so I can study what good dialogue, looks like and sounds like. And, in some of the places, the author outright said what the character was feeling, but then in other places it was more described. So there was that mix. It wasn't always using description, if that makes sense. So those were just some of the things that that I noticed and I got from it. And and there were a lot of little sub stories, not a lot, but there were a few little sub stories going on in the story. And maybe this was part of the appeal for me too, was there was a little love story also interwoven into it, So I think that idea or the theme of love, I think is important to me in my writing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the parents had this really great relationship and very, loving, and I'm appalled, but this book is probably going to get banned in Oklahoma because it has inferences about sex in it. Oh yeah, there's a bunch of women that have gotten together, and it has and they've got a senator or a congressman in Oklahoma to actually sponsor the bill, and it's up for vote.
Right.
Yeah, censorship. It's very scary. But anyway, I'm digressing, but yeah, and you could tell they were still, they had a physical relationship going on, so I don't know, the realness of, and that unashamed like oftentimes you read books or children's book, not children, because this is for young adults, but you get these books and there's not real life in it, so real life is not portrayed, and this portrays a lot of real life. So I think that was also a draw for me, is portraying real life, the sweet and the lovely and the beautiful, and then also there's sad and tragic and injustice, and how do we deal with that, and how do we triumph over it. So those were some of the things that the themes and some of the literary devices that I noticed, and I'm going to go and keep studying it, because that's not something I'm used to. I'm not used to studying what I'm watching or reading, so I'm looking at tone, and I'm looking at theme, and then some of the literary devices and things like that I mentioned, but I want to dig a bit deeper.
That's beautiful, Carmen. I'm very proud of you, and I love your energy and how committed you are. We can all feel it.
Oh.
And we know that, have no doubt that you'll write this book, and it's gonna be, exactly the way you want it. No more, no less. And forget about awards or recognition, but I think it's going to be very authentic, and which is what you care about the most, I feel. So I heard some amazing pointers in there. Do watch this back and maybe even write these down if you don't already have them written down. But for you, the message is more compelling than the tone or the artistic literacy. And whatever that message is, then ask yourself, how does the author carries that message across? What is he using then? Is he using the sequence of the storytelling, or is he using, you mentioned the dialogue, but if you were to take one piece of dialogue separately, how can you encode the message in that dialogue, right? Is that message present there, or is it just because you know the story and the story carries it through, if you know what I mean? It can be that you can have two friends having a coffee, but because you know the context, then that coffee becomes very important or very insignificant. So that's another decision in terms of storyline that we make as authors. Do we connect these, or do we write them separately? Another thing you said there is the sub-stories or the underlying story that can connect a book in an amazing way. Even if you write short stories, and I know a couple of you do, you can have an underlying theme or an underlying relationship that can unfold in parallel, and that indeed is one of the best ways you can gel a story. So that's also very important. And I know from your outline, like you said, love and relationships is quite important for you. So maybe you can absolutely use that throughout the different periods of time that you describe. Yeah, and last but not least, you mentioned about studying. Absolutely, and when I think of studying, I don't think of, oh, we all should go to literary school. I'm thinking studying as in becoming very intimate with the text, becoming very connected with that text, and really also curious, really becoming curious, like, what is that? How did they do that? And then asking questions, asking yourself questions, and asking those around you. And anyway, this is what the group is for. This is what the writers class is for. That's why I've asked you to share on the chat, because you can share a paragraph, and maybe you saw some things and you can bounce off ideas from the group, and they can offer a different perspective of your favorite pieces of work. So that's a really good reason to share that. Thank you so much, Carmen, for sharing that work with us. It's really insightful. Hi, Maha. Welcome, honey. It's nice to see you. We're going through. Yeah, that's okay. We're going through last week's homework, and Carmen shared some of the work she did as diving deeper into her favorite work and taking note of the tools the author uses to create that story that compels you so much. Is there anyone else who wants to share about anything they did? Vera? Yes, ma'am.
Just really quickly, because Douglas Adams is one of my favorite authors, and I recently read his Dirk Gently book, which is basically about following your intuition. It's the whole thing is just how to jump into the river and float, basically. And I've always loved his writing, but now I was trying to think, what is it that I enjoy about him? Why is that? And I somehow feel super connected to his style of writing, even though I'm not close to what he does. But what really is there, it's ridiculously serious. So it's a weird twist of being serious in this really weird, pompous words, but it's so serious that it becomes ridiculous, but it's still serious. The topic is serious, the topic is important. So it is this whole weird twist of you are being serious, but actually it's really funny, but actually the topic is very serious. So he's able to discuss things that are hard in a very light way. And he is hiding things inside. He's wrapping hard things inside humor and inside the story. And I feel that he's this bizarre way of doing things is giving me a permission to be weird and bizarre myself. So that's but yeah, definitely. Excellent. And the words themselves are something that I really love. So this is what I'm taking from it. I'm using thesaurus, so not just being happy with the words that I use, but try to find different equivalents for the words to make it more alive. Yeah,
lovely. Yeah, so there's a little bit of crafting in there. Yeah, the craft of writing, finding the right word, the right meaning, and also the right resonance of the world. Like you said, serious words or pompous words sometimes may be needed. It depends on each one's style. But like you said, what stood out for me is basically talking about serious things in a light-hearted way. So it is serious, but it's not that serious at the end of the day. Nothing is that serious at the end of the day, right? So there's that playfulness in there, which definitely is your nature as well. Yeah, you have something of fairy, enchanted nature in your writing, in your poetry. At least this is what we know from you. We don't know if you write any prose or if you want to write any prose, but that definitely rings a bell from what you're saying. And then with words, we know that, you know, as we grow as writers and readers, we use words differently, and we grow into the meaning of the words rather than, you know, just I heard the word and I looked it up in the dictionary and thesaurus and it meant that thing, versus, oh my God, that word really, really resonates. Yes, indeed. Fairy, yes, it's I told I told Vera that her collection should be called Enchantress. It's about it's an enchanted world. So beautiful. Thank you, Vera, for that. And I hope, well, you sound better than last week, and I hope you can be back full on next week. Thank you, sweetie. Shante, Maha, do you have anything that you want to bring? If not, I'm offering the hot seat to whoever wants to take it. We haven't done hot seat in a while. Yes,
Yeah.
Shante.
So I was contemplating a short story that I read many, many years ago by J. California Cooper.
Right.
It's in a collection of book stories in a book called Homemade Love. And what I realized about her is her characters have very, very strong voices. Dialect, you can tell where they're from, what type of lives they're living. And she uses a lot of dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
It's present, it's very present. And I feel like I'm on the journey with the character while it's happening. And I think that's why this particular story called Loving, I never forgot that story. And I read it, I don't know, maybe 20 or more years ago.
Yeah.
And so with that in mind, I wrote one of my short stories, and I decided to change it completely and tell it in the voice of an 8-year-old and explore what it was to speak from this 8-year-old's perspective, this story where it's now her journey, and not kind of like this detached place, so it feels more alive. And it was really interesting because when I pulled it apart, I was like, oh my God, I just ruined my story. And then I put it away and I came back to it and I said, this is so much better than what I was doing. So there is definitely something to be said for characters having a really strong voice, that a reader can relate to and they can feel, even if they're not, like the character that I like, he's an older man. He speaks, in some Southern type of dialect, and he's from, the country, and, and I can't relate to him, but I could feel him. I could sense him. I could see him, and I could feel every step of his journey of, waking up and deciding his wife wasn't good enough, so he was gonna leave everything behind to go live in the city, and his whole journey of like being torn down minute by minute by the city until he returns home. It was sad and it was funny, and it was vivid. That's all I can say. It was very, very vivid. I could see the rollers in his wife's hair, so yeah.
Beautiful. It's something magical about dialogue, isn't it? And it makes me think of movies again and motion pictures. Think of it this way: in this form of art, you only have images and dialogue. You have an image and someone's conversation, and that combination obviously creates an entire movie. You effectively see them, like you said, through a different lens altogether. Absolutely, dialogue can bring stuff alive. It really can, especially for characters and short stories. Having said that, though, I know many writers struggle over dialogue and overwork it, and almost don't progress with the story because of the dialogue, etc., etc. Yeah. So while I would say dialogue, it's an amazing tool, definitely worth perfecting and definitely worth looking into, and borrowing these little tips from favorite authors. It's not that serious, as I think this is what I'm trying to say. It is very important, and it's a different way of showing the characters, but it's not that deep for a written piece of work, because we create images with the words. We don't have a camera, we have a pen. So difference between a book and a movie is that we can get inside the mind of a character, and we can be very good in introspective writers. We can be, like Dostoevsky and these guys, Kafka. They hardly ever wrote dialogue other than very short pieces, but they wrote the inner life of a character as if you were inside their heads, right? And that's another beautiful way to describe it. But absolutely having that combination, having, like you said, the Southern accent, having the little bit of flavor and smell and taste of every little scene brought into through dialogue, that's really elevated. Indeed, it really does. And like we said last time, there is the theme of home and community for you, and the theme of love as well that comes up from this favorite short story of yours, which you're carrying through. So yeah, I can't wait to hear your 8-year-old dialogue. I'd love to read that when you want to share. Yes, and Shantae Carmen is also very interested in dialogue, so maybe we can exchange notes on that. And if you find any cool ways of making your dialogue more expressive, do share it with us. We'd love to hear. Absolutely. Maha, tell us, honey, how have you, what have you been doing?
So I wasn't reading my favorite author, but I started reading Big Magic and I'm halfway through the book. And so that's kind of the one that yeah. And it's there, it's not really, there's no dialogue per se. There's sections where she's interviewing people or like, yeah, oh, wow, wonderful. She's so funny. She's hilarious.
She's really funny. She's hilarious, Elizabeth Gilbert.
And I think what I noticed throughout the book is I felt like she was sitting right next to me and having a conversation. Like her tone is very much, she writes as if she's speaking. Like a lot of the, yeah. And I think I resonate with that in terms of it makes her relatable and believable and comfortable. So I think if and when I ever do choose to write a book, and not poetry, then I think it would definitely be something like that, something where I feel like I'm sitting next to someone and having a conversation with them. It keeps it light. I mean, what she talks about is pretty, she also says it's serious, but also not that serious. So I thought that was funny that you mentioned that. Yeah. But it flows really well. She uses a lot of examples of like when she introduces a topic and she's like, oh, and this is how this person did this. Or just like the fact that it's lots of coincidences and, the magic. But I think overall, she does keep it light, very funny, and a very quick read, honestly.
Brilliant. You say that you're going to wait until you write a book, as if poetry is not a book. But
I was referring more in like novels or.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
No, don't worry about it. It's interesting though that you are writing now, and that the characters you use are animals depicting feelings. I would just ask myself, can I not be that relatable with my animal characters? Can they not be having conversations? Can they not be basically existing as if they had conversations with the reader? What if they just have a one-to-one conversation with the child reading that, right? What if your bear and your elephant can have this kind of conversation, right? What if they can be talking about something really serious like anger or sadness, but it's not that serious, right? Why to do that, right?
It's actually interesting that the animals are speaking, because the way that I've structured some of the sections right now is it's more like I am asking the reader, do you ever feel overwhelmed? Do you ever feel like this? Like I am sitting there and talking to them in a sense. And then it's like, well, let me tell you, there's this koala and this koala makes you feel better. Or, so I think it's a different voice if it's the voice of the animal versus the voice of the author who's speaking or the reader who's speaking to the person who's being read to.
Absolutely, it's a
Yeah.
different voice. So
Interesting. Okay, I'll play around with that. That's a
play
good
around,
idea.
just something to play around with.
Yeah.
And also, Ma, you are writing a book. Let that sink in. What you are writing is a book. It may
just
be
like-
easier to think that you're not writing a book right now, but
Maybe
you are
that's how I compartmentalizing it in my head so I don't flip out about it. Like, oh, it's not a book.
I had the gist of that, oh yeah, later when I'm writing a book. Yep, that's now. Sorry to drop it on you. And by the way, thank you for sharing your beautiful outline with me. I have started reading it. I've not finished. I do want to give you a proper feedback though when we speak. So I'll hold off until then. I think the book is brilliant. The idea you have, the ideas you have are brilliant, and I'll just say this: don't be afraid to break tradition or expectations. A snake can be a friendly guy. Yeah, think of Jungle Book.
Yep.
Yeah. So elephants can dance even though they're big, and don't be afraid to play with those ideas. And maybe your book has to break the tradition or break the preconception of whatever an animal symbolizes. And yeah, it goes back to the same thing. Play with the idea. Maybe your animals can talk, maybe they can make jokes.
Yeah.
See where we go. Beautiful. All right, lovelies. We do have 5 minutes. If you want to bring a specific issue, if anyone wants to take a hot seat or ask something or mention something they've been struggling with or something they haven't understood properly, or just simply bring something that they want to bring to the group, we have the next 5 minutes for a hot seat. We haven't done a hot seat in a while. You'll do it. Go on, Carmen. You do it. Take one for the team.
So sometimes I struggle in something you mentioned earlier that made me think, that is where I tend to get a little hung up. Sometimes I struggle with finding the right word, or that word that conveys the exact meaning. So I don't know if you can speak into that a little bit. And for me, when I was 31, I had a ischemic event. Like, if I'd been older, the doctor said they would have called it a stroke, but and I have aphasia. I don't have it severely. I did like the first 6 months to a year and a half after it happened. But sometimes I just really struggle with getting that word through. But even if I didn't have this, I think, I would love some words of wisdom or some mentoring on that.
Totally understand where you're coming from, and I appreciate you having aphasia at 31, that would impact your confidence. It doesn't matter who you are. First, some very practical tips. There are websites online, they're brilliant, that I use as well. I use the Love for Poetry. I'm going to send you the links that I have. You literally put a word in and they give you exact synonyms, near matches, words that are formed from the same syllables. So there's a lot of tools like that online. I'm not a native English speaker, but this has been extremely useful. And many times I was looking for a word, and all I did, I was just start with the first word that comes in and then find synonyms and work my way that way. right? And until I found something that had that ring, and I would sit with the word, and again, I'll put it, in the verse and see if it made sense. And if it didn't, I would take it out. Even if the word in itself, it makes sense on its own, it may not fit in the sentence. So that was my process. But I do want to say one more thing. If you're looking for a word and you're looking for a word and you're looking for a word and it's not coming, you need more than a word. It's because it's not in the word where you're looking to offer. It's that you need a metaphor, you need a comparison, you need to make an inanimate object animate. You need to use another tool in the writer's book. It's not just about semantics. This is what I was trying to say earlier when Vera mentioned her favorite author in Pompous Word. The choice of the word is not necessarily about the semantics of the word. It's about the rhythm and the vibration it creates next to the other words. You could choose a really complicated word or elaborate word, but again, it doesn't fit. So what I mean about that, to give you a good example, you may want to say that, let's say, I don't know, a character is going through a very difficult time and they're feeling overwhelmed, or this comes, I think, Shante, I think I read something about you, someone waiting at the bus stop and started to rain, or this is coming to me right now for whatever reason. And instead of talking about how the character feels, you could describe the way the raindrops fall and the way the raindrops touch his clothes, or the way the raindrops form together on the window against the backdrop of where he's waiting for the bus. You could start talking about the nature around him as an image of his feelings rather than he's overwhelmed, right? The nature is overwhelmed. The rain is dropping down, it's heavy, it's falling. So you're creating that feeling or that atmosphere by using everything around your character, right? So everything around the character becomes the character, or is the character. And this is actually where it takes us very nicely into today's topic, which is refining your writing. Carmen, I hope that helped. I hope that made
Oh,
sense.
tremendously. Yes. Yes. Tremendously.
So today's topic is fine-tuning, researching and refining our work. And I said here, I wrote these notes before the session, and I do have to congratulate you because you did come a long way. You consider where you were in February the 7th, and you didn't know about outlines, or you didn't have a clear idea where you're going, but now you know why you're writing. Yeah, you've made your declaration, and if you ever get lost, just go back and read it. You have an idea about the voice and the tone, what you like and how you will like to sound as a writer. And now you're at that stage that Carmen touched upon. Now you're writing and you want to get that feeling across. It may not be the time now. You're maybe just, maybe
was born in the 80s with that summertime love.
I'm so sorry.
Brilliant. That was nicely timed, because I was just about to say, maybe it's not the time to do it now, and that may apply. We're going to interrupt it. Maybe you do this after. That was really funny. After is that your ringtone, Carmen? No.
Yeah, it's one of my alarms.
Your alarm. I was about to say that You could do this after your first draft is ready. The reason I say this is because I don't want you to get bogged down into perfect words or perfect formats. I would ideally want you to get your first draft out of everything, get your first draft of your book out and then fine tune it. But people have different styles of writing. Some people want to get one story perfect and then move on to another, or get one poem perfect and move on to another. It depends how you want to do it. But I would suggest, if you write prose, short stories and stories in general, anything other than poetry, I would suggest to get the first draft out in full and then start fine tuning it. It will just be more practical and you will form a rhythm. That's very important when you write prose. With poetry, slightly different. You may get that image, which is in poetry, it's a short, intense feeling that you want to translate through a limited amount of words. And you may want to really perfect it before you move on, because it's a short glimpse. I did it that way. I wrote each poem until it was ready, and then I moved on. If I had any changes I wanted to make, I made them at the very end, but I have to admit they were very insignificant changes, the changes that I've made when I went on the second run. So again, you may want to put your energy in getting your first draft out, whatever part of the work you're drafting, get your first draft out and then start refining your work. And there's some things to consider when we're talking about refining work. Time and place. Now, if your work is of a realistic nature, if you're actually writing biographies or writing stories that happened in a certain time, in a certain historical time or culture, then are you depicting scenes accurately? How accurate is what you're depicting if your story is realistic? You should consider or make the decision if your character fits into that social environment or if they don't fit. If they don't fit, usually it makes a more interesting or compelling story or a more memorable story. But decide if they fit or if they don't fit, and then show why. Like if they're a woman living in the 18th centuries and they don't want to wear the dresses, what were they wearing? And it can be details like that. Even if you're writing something that's very actual or very current, even if you're writing about something that's happening today, then think about, again, the social environment that you're depicting through your words. Is that an accurate depiction, again, if your work is realistic? But if your work, obviously, it's not of a realistic nature, if you're writing utopias, if you're writing things that don't exist, then you have to be creating that world, but you still have to be accurate in the rules you create for the world you're creating, right? So think of Star Trek, yeah. Again, so I'm my favorite. I'm a Trekkie. They're creating. Yeah, I'm a Trekkie. They're creating the rules of teleportation, the warp speed, and how machinery works, and the Klingons and how they battle, and yeah, Vera, you're a Trekkie too. Yeah, I watched a lot of Star Trek episodes in my lifetime. So if you think of that world, the world doesn't exist, they created it, but it's very specific. It has its own rules, and the cultural aspects are very clearly said. So just so that the reader can dive into that world and they can relate to what's happening, yeah, between the Romulans and between the Klingons and everybody else. So they know, oh my God, they're going to get really offended now if they're going to touch their phasers. So don't do that. So that's the kind of social, cultural, time and place for refinement you want to consider. The next one, it's relevance, the aspect of relevance. Now, every sentence you write has to be relevant. And I know that's a big ask, but it is the reality of a really good story, a memorable story. Even descriptions of inanimate objects, and I mentioned earlier in the example to Carmen, they have to carry the same energy that the dialogue carries and the same energy that your character carries. This is when everything becomes relevant to your message, you know? If you're writing a story about struggles with mental illness, then everything, the nature, the rooms, the light in the room, the way the character perceives other characters, everything will be slightly distorted, right? If they're suffering with mental illness. And in the same way, if it's romance stories happening in the summer, everything is lighthearted and joyful and vibrant. So this has to be relevant in a sense of it's relevant to your core message and to your core story. And again, the question is, what are you trying to transmit with this scene? What is it that you want the reader to understand or to experience? And then that's how you make the decision. Does that paragraph belong here then in that situation? Or am I rambling on about something that's really not relevant? I mean, I may be describing a building with Victorian architecture and how tall the building is, but is that needed here in this scene or in this description? Does it make sense to the message I want to carry? So yeah, that's relevance. The next one is topic. Now, if you're writing about exact sciences or precise historical moments, you may be writing science fiction or medicine, or maybe you don't write science fiction, but it's a trip into the future, right? And you may need to use aspects of science, quantum physics, etc. Then it's really, really worth investing time in your research and even consider consulting someone from that area of expertise, right? Even if you're writing about, I would say, inner life or, mental illness or challenges, do read about it and do read if, for example, there are specific signs or symptoms that patients suffering of a certain illness exhibit, and then how can you use that to best show the journey of a character, So this is where the research comes in, this is where that work, the legwork comes in. And that's why I'm saying this should be done really after the first draft is ready, because this does take time. So imagine you're trying to get a book out that has, I don't know, 150 pages, and in every 10 pages, something that's very specific will be mentioned. And if you're going to want to finish that book, you want to get a first draft out. Otherwise, you'll be there forever with your research, right? Okay, and finally, I was saying here, even if you are the expert of your field, you may write about intuition, like Vera was saying, or inner life, right? Through your experience, you're the expert of it. You're the expert of your own life. Cool. Run it. I said, run it past someone in the same field for a second pair of eyes, right? So let's say you write about inner life, psychology, emotions. Is there anyone in your circle that has similar interest or has written similar stuff, or they simply work in that domain and they could just simply have another read to make sure that it makes sense and it's on the topic, right? The last point I mentioned and I want to talk to you about today, it's fluidity, the fluidity of the story. If you ever read a really good book, you don't want to put it down, and you don't put it down because it flows so well. Every end of chapter takes you into the beginning of another, and you can't wait to see what happens to this character, how does the story end, how does it develop? That's fluidity, the fluidity of a story. Now, this aspect is often overlooked, I have to admit. But it really does make the difference between a good and an amazing book. And even if this is your first book, and I know it is for all of us, you will get a sense of what flows naturally and what doesn't. If an experienced writer, it when you write it yourself, you get that instinctual feeling, this really can't, I can't quite fit this bit into here. It's like you're making a puzzle and you're trying to fit the piece that's not cut out in the right way. You will feel it. So all I have to say there is just trust it. Don't dismiss your intuition, because at the end of the day, you can't write without your intuition, no matter what anyone says. I mean, you can be a very good technical writer and a scientist, but you'll read their book, you'll be bored to death, and you won't relate to it at all. You'll say, oh, all right, really good command of the English language. I'd rather watch a movie or a documentary about it, So it's not about being a very skilled, proficient writer who graduated literature at, I don't know, Columbia University, whatever. I don't know what universities are strong in the US in literature, Carmen. Here it's Oxford and Cambridge. But it's about trusting the instinct you have as a writer, understanding where your story flows and doesn't flow, and having that confidence to change it or to ask for an opinion. And this is where editors come in. This is where, as writers, we need to put the work away and get someone like a developmental editor or a literary editor and come in and give us an opinion. I'm telling you, no matter who you are, and probably the Hemingway's work has been edited to the bone, and many people who are familiar with his work, they actually credit his editor for the work, which I don't think it's fair, because Hemingway was drunk and he was high when he was writing, but it was his stories and it was his idea that eventually got depicted. But the fact that he was clever enough, he knew he was drunk when he was writing. I said, I'm going to get a really good editor to help me connect the dots of my story, right? That's how I encourage you to see it. I wrote at the time when I was putting the notes together, think of it as getting a tour guide when you visit a place you've never visited before, and you may not speak the local language. Now, what you want to do, you want to get lost in a local village without being able to ask for a place, or where can I get some food and work, and how can I get to know your place? Or would you rather speak to someone that speaks the language and they can guide you so that you get to visit and experience that place? Is the same with book writing. You'll get to some places you don't know, and it's okay. Writers are not editors, and writers are not copywriters, and writers are not publicists. And we'll talk about more the industry in 2 weeks' time, but there's that sincerity and honesty of knowing, where your work ends and someone else's begins. You have to grow into that position, and you have to really become very authentic and vulnerable about your work in that sense. Then again, think of it this way: you could you could write this book and keep it to yourself, never make it see the light of day, and keep it in your drawer. And okay, you wrote the book, congratulations. And that will definitely keep you safe of all the scrutiny that you will meet when all, anyone who has access to buying a book can buy a book, and they'll scrutinize your work, they'll scrutinize your life, right? So then if you keep it into your drawers, then you're safe. You don't have to go through that, right? Then you keep it. But then think of all the opportunities you're missing out, and you're causing others to miss out. Think of all the books you've read that touched you. Again, you all mentioned words here, short stories, novellas, and real life work that really touched you. And again, put yourself in the shoes of that author who would have never gone through the stages of publishing. They would have said, well, I'd rather keep this book to myself, right? Now, yeah, if you connect it to that author that way, you'll realize they're human and they know where their work ends and someone else's begins. And, having your work reviewed by someone else, it's the first step towards publishing your book, putting it on the market. You cannot get away with it. There are people who try to do that anyway, and they have a spell check by a friend. There's nothing wrong with that. But I will not guarantee the results, and I would not recommend that at all. So having said that, we've reached the end of the class. Remember to fine-tune your work. The things to consider are time and place, relevance, topic, and last but not least, fluidity. And as a homework for next week, continue what you did last week when I have asked you to read your favorite author's work again. And this time, go through the 4 or 5 points I mentioned and try to notice and even write down, how did they stay on topic? How are they depicting the time and place? What is relevant? How, go into, let's say, a favorite chapter and look at the sequence of paragraphs and see how are they relevant to the story. Can you find anything that's not relevant? Sometimes you can. The conversation between editor and writer is fluid. Usually the big publishing houses win the battle on what goes in and what goes out. But if it's a self-published book, you may find superfluous paragraphs. Depends on the author. If you do find any of these examples that useful, I do want to encourage you, do share on the group. Do ask questions, exchange opinion with us, because that's why we're here for. That's what the space is for. And it will also bring you, like I said earlier, a different perspective and a different level of understanding what it is that you are looking at. And with that, you would automatically incorporate it into your tools. All right, beauties. That was it for me from today. If anyone wants to bring any questions, you know what to do, you know how to reach me. Until next time, which is, by the way, because it's Easter weekend, I think we're skipping Easter Monday. Yeah, we are. So we're off on the 18th and we're back on the 25th. But, we're still on the group. We can stay connected there. And just, drop us a note on there, and we'll pick up next week with how to publish a book. We're going to publish it. All right, lovelies. Thank you very much. Enjoy your week, and I'll see you soon. I'll probably see you at the poetry group later on this week. Take care.
Thanks, Paula.
Bye.
Everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.